Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 4th of September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Thank you for joining us, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
We'll get straight on with it, Pat, because, we're about to blow up the world, apparently. North Korea is the big deal. I could have chosen any of the mainstream media here because they are hysterical about this situation. The Financial Times, Trump opens door to attack on North Korea after H-bomb test. First of all, what is the size of this hydrogen bomb? Is it a hydrogen bomb? What kind of missile is it going to go on? Does the missile have a guidance system? Is it an intercontinental ballistic missile? There are lots of questions here which the mainstream media doesn't seem to want to ask. They just seem to want to regurgitate a load of rhetoric.
Well, the answer to a lot of those questions which you just posed there, Mike, if you look at this Financial Times article again, you'll see the word H-bomb is in quotes.
Yes.
So this is what's the mainstream media is hedging here, clearly hedging, because they themselves don't know. It seems so far, Mike, that the number one source for this report is the state broadcaster out of Pyongyang, so North Korean state media. So how much credence do you want to give those announcements? How politicized might they be, and why would Reuters, the Financial Times, and every single Western mainstream media outlet be taking that all verbatim without any verifications? Because it seems like they're always demanding verification from everybody else for their claims.
Absolutely. Now, Matthew Rycroft stated this morning that the UK and its allies had called an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council this morning. This is what Theresa May had to say. She said that this latest action by North Korea is reckless and poses an unacceptable further threat to the international community. I discussed various things with Abe in Japan earlier last week, and she said the international community has universally condemned this test and must come together to continue to increase the pressure on North Korea's leaders to stop their destabilizing actions. Well, we showed the Financial Times. Let's look at the BBC's coverage of it. North Korea preparing more missile launches, says the South. And South Korea decided that the best way that they could disengage from this whole thing would be to fire off some tests of their own. Now, they're not getting condemned for this for some reason.
They're actually firing missiles, whereas North Korea is claiming that they did an H-bomb test. And what's interesting about those claims is an artificial earthquake is being claimed.
Where's the independent seismic verification for this?
We're still waiting for that, and so that's basically supposed to be the fingerprint of the H-bomb test. So again, we've seen these claims before from North Korea, and afterwards we found out retrospectively, Mike, that oftentimes they're exaggerated or they in fact didn't happen at all. The point is that North Korea does not have an operable intercontinental ballistic missile. They have never tested one successfully. For all intents and purposes, Mike, they haven't yet built one. So you can see the level of hype and reactionary rhetoric here being ramped up by the West, specifically by Washington, and of course the UK's comments are all too predictable. They seem to be doing more to increase the tension, Mike, and the so-called destabilizing efforts in the region than North Korea itself, who hasn't actually done much. And they're wanting to, of course, take everything they say at face value. This reminds me of ISIS, Mike, when ISIS releases a press release and the West are all too happy to basically take it at face value, verbatim, and saying, oh my gosh, look what ISIS has done or said here, look what they've claimed. And so without any kind of independent verification of the veracity of any of those statements or official releases, same thing is happening here in North Korea. It seems to suit Washington perfectly, actually, to take it at face value and then to react predictably in kind.
And somebody in the chat box there saying Kim Jong-un ate my poodle. This is kind of the rhetoric. We've got to fear this man because he's going to kill us in our beds.
Sure.
So anyway, let's look at what Jim Mattis actually said, because the rhetoric here is amazing. We are not looking to the total annihilation of a country, namely North Korea, but as I said, we have many options to do so.
That's not encouraging comments from the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Jay Mattis. This is kind of fighting talk, Mike, here. This is actually almost a declaration of war talk. What's he talking about? The annihilation of North Korea. North Korea hasn't attacked anybody yet, so I think it's a bit early, it's a bit premature to be talking about annihilating North Korea. But then James Mattis, his nickname is the Mad Dog, Mike, and he's trying to live up to this incredible reputation he has of being a mad dog. On the other hand, they want to call him a warrior monk because he's read a few books about the Peloponnesian Wars, and therefore somehow he's an expert on world affairs. All I see with General Mattis and the rest of the military brass surrounding Donald Trump is 15 years of failure. 15 years of failure in Afghanistan, and another dozen years of failure in Iraq. So these are all, this cabal of generals, they've got great resumes full of the worst military and foreign policy failures in United States history. What exactly do they know about foreign affairs then? What do they have to offer the American people in the world other than failures in Afghanistan and Iraq? That's my question.
So they're creating this new bogeyman for the world at the moment. Okay, North Korea has been an issue for a number of years, but it's been at a very low level. Suddenly it's right up in our faces all of a sudden. I'm wondering...
very convenient timing.
Why that is now. And,
very convenient
and do you think this is something to do with it? On screen here we have Russia Today's article about Deir ez-Zor. Syrian army flattens ISIS positions, will enter Deir ez-Zor within 48 hours, according to the local governor. This is related. We want to divert attention away from the fact that the war in Syria is lost.
It's lost. Somehow someone didn't get the memo, which we tried to issue back in December 2016 when East Aleppo was liberated and the terrorists were driven out of that position. That was a sea change moment. Deir ez-Zor, Mike, strategically is as important as Aleppo strategically, if we're talking about the whole of eastern Syria and northeastern Syria, and also Palmyra and Hama, and this triangle that ISIS has more or less had operational control over for the last few years. We're looking at the complete eradication of ISIS.
Well, let's just look at this, because somebody was kind enough to tweet out a map showing ISIS occupation of Syria over since January this year. And the top left there, we've got ISIS looking like it's got about 2/3 of the country there. By August, it's got very little, and he's predicting that by January 2018, it'll be completely gone. This certainly seems to be the case.
Yeah, and even that first figure there in January 2017, that's a bit exaggerated because all they're occupying there is barren, mostly barren desert. So the populated areas obviously aren't in there.
Yep.
But it does show you sort of ISIS had operational control over large sections.
It's a spectacular collapse in 6 months, isn't it?
It is, and they're being routed along the Euphrates River. They're being routed in the Deir ez-Zor countryside. And the reason they're being routed, Mike, and this is what the West are so keen to focus on North Korea now, is the cooperation between the Syrian Arab Army and the Russian Air Force and Hezbollah militias and Iran. So this is a huge success. This is a monumentous victory on behalf of this allied coalition here: Syria, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and some of the other stakeholders in that effort. And this is being completely muted, Mike, completely covered up by this kind of what I think is a completely staged confrontation in North Korea to cover up the worst loss of a 7-year war. This is one of the longest protracted conflicts waged by the West post-World War II. I think only Vietnam might be longer, but technically it might be one of the longest ever. And so they've absolutely lost. They've been routed. They've plowed billions of dollars into arming terrorists throughout Syria. This has been proven, Mike. We've proven it on this show. We've seen the documents that we presented as well. Weapons trafficking into the hands of terrorist groups, including ISIS, using these weapons, okay? And so look at this. After all this, they've destroyed half the country of Syria, and now they're having to withdraw. They've lost. And the last thing the Western countries want to do, the last thing the Nikki Haley's, Samantha Powers, or the Matthew Rycrofts of the world want to do is let the world see this on the 7 o'clock news.
Well, let's add in this headline then from AMN. British troops withdraw from South Syria end training to militants. So this has got to be part of it as well, because part of the collapse is not only because of the coordinated action of the Syrian army and the Russians and the others that you've mentioned, but part of the collapse as well is the fact that the West has removed its support for these militants, these terrorists. So this has got to be seen as good news. So the report here is that the UK has withdrawn its troops from the coalition-operated Al-Tarif base in Syria's southwestern desert and de facto ended all military assistance hitherto provided to the Free Syrian Army, affiliated mercenaries in the region, just like the US military personnel who were also part of the so-called moderate opposition training program in southern Syria. British Special Forces troops operated from a coalition base established in the town of Al-Tarif near Syria's border with Iraq, and they're running away because they operationally know that the war is lost. And they clearly don't want to be found with boots on the ground. And let's not forget that as recently as a few weeks ago, the Ministry of Defence was absolutely denying to me in a press exchange that there were any British boots on the ground in Syria. Of course, we understood that was a slight fib, shall we say, but it's good to see that the recognition is that they need to get out quickly.
U.S. Special Forces and British Special Forces and other countries too, I believe Norway, France, Germany, and many others have participated in this project to sort of give technical and military backup to militants. They're saying the Free Syrian Army officially, Mike, but the Free Syrian Army is a construct that's used by the West to justify this illegal and illicit program, which is really backing terrorist groups for the most part. In fact, it's completely backing terrorist groups like al-Nusra and other al-Nusra affiliates, the many, many affiliates under that umbrella who've done rebranding and so forth. And so the British are there running cohorts, Mike, running cohorts. So that's what our militaries are doing in the West, and they've been hiding it and shrouding it in this sort of train and equip programs that they claim that they did but failed, or they're trying to train the Free Syrian Army to fight ISIS. What a joke. What a joke. The only person fighting ISIS right now, the only people actually fighting ISIS, if you look at the results, Mike, the Syrian Army, the Russian Air Force, Hezbollah, and Iran. I don't see the U.S. announcing losing any troops on the ground in any firefights with ISIS, any planes shot down, but the casualties are being sustained by Syria, by Russia, by Hezbollah, massive casualties. They're fighting the war on terror, not the West. The West seem to be doing it from an arm's length, pretending to be doing it for public relations purposes. In reality, what they're doing is trying to embolden, to arm, and to empower extremist groups in the hopes that they might destabilize the country and overthrow what they call the regime in Damascus. That's what's been going on for the last 6 years.
Okay, well, in parallel with all this, because it's a complex picture, the pressure on Russia continues. Just spiteful little things from time to time that come up. So let's just look at a few of them. First of all, we have Goldsmiths University in London hosting this conference that they're calling, and the headline, or the title of the conference is Pussy Riot, Russia's Official Media and How to Subvert It. Correct me if I'm wrong, but subversion is an aggressive act, Patrick.
Yeah. So they're saying how to subvert RT, and this is kind of an act of desperation here. Who are Pussy Riot, by the way? I think it's this supposedly a pop group. No one's ever actually heard any of their music, but they made YouTube videos, and I think a few of them got thrown into jail for simulating and defiling the sort of holy cathedral in Moscow. And so my simple question is to everybody out there who supports Pussy Riot, what would happen if you did that in Westminster Abbey?
Yeah. Or
in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., or St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City? Do you think that the authorities would be clapping and calling you a free speech hero, or would you in fact be arrested and possibly thrown in jail, sentenced? End
up on the sex offenders register?
Who knows?
So anyway, this conference, it's a free conference, so maybe some people would like to go along to it and ask some interesting questions.
I think they might.
This is, apparently Maria is a political activist, artist, and founding member of the punk collective Pussy Riot. convicted in 2012 of hooliganism motivated by religious hatred, as you say, and she helped fund Mediazona after her release.
Helped fund it?
Yes.
I wonder who else funded it.
Well, possibly a certain Hungarian friend of ours.
Our Hungarian friend,
yes.
yes.
So they're going to run a series of talks and performances, and there's going to be questions, I'm sure.
Wow.
So maybe people want to go along to that.
Sounds exciting.
In the meantime, in the United States, you're invading Russian consulates, closing down Russian consulates. This is a dark day in American diplomacy, says Ms. Zakharova, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson. And she said it was a gross violation of international law, including the Vienna Conventions. We call on American authorities to come to their senses and immediately return Russian diplomatic facilities. Otherwise, the entire blame for continuing degradation of relations between our countries, on which the state of global stability and international security largely depends, will be on the United States. Now, it turns out that the US is claiming that the reason that they gave this 48 hours notice and they told them to get out and then search the building was they were apparently looking for explosives, Patrick.
Yeah, right.
So is the Russian consulate now a staging post for terrorism? Is that what's being alleged here?
This is ridiculous.
And then just to add insult to injury, back in the UK, the Russians attempted to set up a Twitter account. An historical Twitter account. This was about the UK embassy in the Russian Empire in 1917. But because the UK's logo was used on this, the UK complained to Twitter, and Twitter shut the account down. But this was purely designed, according to the Russians anyway, was going to be an historic. It wasn't intended to sort of take the mickey out of anybody or misuse any official logos. It was merely to show what was going on at the time.
That's just petty.
Well, I mean, it's all petty, isn't it?
It's all petty, but it's also kind of dangerous too, because where does it end, Mike? Where does this kind of reactionary, irrational, it is irrational behavior on the part of the U.S. and in this case the U.K. They must be really upset about Syria.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It didn't go very well, did it?
No. Now, on the Sunday Wire, the 200th episode of the Sunday Wire, congratulations for that anniversary.
Yeah, we hit the 200 mark, so that's our fourth year.
So that was last night live, and if you haven't heard it yet, it's available as an archive on 21stcenturywire.com. But one of the things we were talking about with Dilyana Gutniera was the fact that ISIS militants leaving Syria and going to other parts of the world, including Africa and other places. And this has got to be the danger, because we're blowing up perpetual warfare in lots of other places. And Burma, of course, is one of those places. So apparently, according to various news media sources, the Rohingya children, there have been Rohingya children beheaded, people burned alive. So this is attacks on the Rohingya community in Burma. They have left Burma, 87,000 of them, according to this France 24 headline, and as refugees moved to Bangladesh. So pretty horrendous stuff going on in Burma against the Rohingya population there. With what purpose? To cause an excuse for some kind of Islamic uprising in Burma, perhaps.
Possibly.
What does Boris Johnson have to say? He said Aung San Suu Kyi is rightly regarded as one of the most inspiring figures of her age, but the treatment of the Rohingya is alas besmirching the reputation of Burma. So that's what he had to say. But I just thought it was interesting, Patrick, that once again we have more problems in a country that's been in receipt of British international development funding. Once again, I think we said this on the programme last night, everywhere that international development funding goes from the United Kingdom, we end up with this kind of nonsense taking place.
And the NGO complex moves in as well. And so Myanmar, Burma, has been colonized very well by the NGO complex, and also by some of the big corporate brands that we know and love in the West.
Yes, and not only in Burma, because somewhere else has been in receipt of Department for International Development money, of course, Kenya, and 2 policemen apparently killed by Islamic extremists in Kenya yesterday. So
it's Britain's old stomping ground there.
Absolutely.
Kenya, gangs and counter gangs. Just thinking of the Mau Mau uprisings in the 50s, and this looks like a redux of sorts.
But they've spread this right across the world, and of course, they're the insurgents, the people that are pushing this, have had good training in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I think it's important in all of these, in Burma, in Kenya, and all these places, Mike. There's been a cycle of violence and sectarianism that's been promoted by the former colonial rulers of those countries as well. And the NGOs are also big into promoting tribal differences, sectarianism, just like the sort of identity politics that's being cultivated here in Europe. Just look how NGOs and charities are active in our countries, trying to promote division between people, racial division, sectarianism. They're absolutely at it in Africa. And look at places like the Congo, Rwanda, South Sudan, Uganda, all of these places that we mentioned as well in Asia. So this is a way to divide and rule former colonial possessions. So we should be on the lookout for some of this activity and be able to call it out as it happens.
Absolutely. Now, the Tipperary Peace Convention is about to take place. This is 32 years, they say, of promoting a peaceful future as an annual peace prize.
Interesting.
It was created by local Tipperary people, apparently, to counter association between Tipperary and the song "Long Way to Tipperary," which is used by the British military as a marching song, and they wanted to separate themselves a bit from this association with armies and war, particularly the British Army and any wars. So it's been awarded annually, as I say, since 1984. Bob Geldof has received it. Gordon Wilson, who was the Irish senator and peace campaigner. Mikhail Gorbachev, Nelson Mandela, Bill Clinton, Rudy Giuliani has received one.
Rudy Giuliani?
Rudy, yes.
Wow.
Is he a peaceful man, Patrick?
Well, he's made millions of dollars in the global police state security business, and he is a sort of an arch neoconservative when it comes to foreign policy. He hasn't seen an intervention he doesn't like. And Bill Clinton, interesting, is this the man that bombed Yugoslavia? Is this the same Bill Clinton that bombed Iraq? It seems to me.
Yes.
Why would you give a peace prize to someone like that?
So hold on to your hats, because this year's winners, the white hats, the white helmets.
Oh, well, and there's even the fake white helmets photo using the women.
Absolutely.
Claiming that they have women rescuers. I thought that's very nice that they're using. Is that the photo they're using?
That is the photo that they're using.
Wow, so they're using a fake staged photo to promote their award this year.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting. Why would they choose the white helmets for a peace prize?
Well, because they didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize last year, so we've got to get some third-class alternative.
So a consolation prize.
Consolation prize, perhaps. But anyway, it may not be too late, because it hasn't been awarded yet. We know that they've won, but it hasn't been awarded yet. And we know that right up to the line with the Nobel Committee, that they had intended to give the White Helmets the prize last year, but the campaigning around that stopped it absolutely at the 11th hour. So there's still an opportunity perhaps to stop this. There is a telephone number that I've been given that maybe people might like to give their thoughts on this. If the 00353 62 33 is a number that you might like to call and offer some thoughts on whether the White Helmets are an appropriate organization to win this or not.
Well, we've shown evidence on this program, Mike, and on other programs that show White Helmets members, many of them in fact, dozens of them in fact, also having dual membership with al-Nusra, for instance, and seen armed as well. So, I'd say, how can you be a member of an internationally recognized terrorist group fighting for a terrorist group is funded by foreign powers as well and armed, and then somehow be a peaceful search and rescue first responder too, with a first responder group, Mike, that's getting hundreds of millions of dollars from USAID, the British Foreign Office, the EU, and a number of other countries. It doesn't really add up very well. But then again, I could probably excuse the organizers of this Peace Prize. They probably haven't even looked at the facts. They've probably only been watching CNN or reading The Guardian, And that's pretty much the impression they get of the white helmets, is that they're, angels helping save 90,000 lives, they've claimed, Mike.
Yep.
Since 2013, somehow they've saved 90,000 lives in Syria. They haven't provided any documentation of the names of any of these 90,000, the locations of where they've been saved, the dates, the times, so you could actually cross-reference that with the so-called barrel bombs or airstrikes from Assad or the Russians. None of that data is forthcoming. Therefore, one can only deduce from that maybe they're making up and inflating those figures, Mike.
Absolutely.
But until we see some evidence, we have to assume that that's a big possibility.
Yeah. Okay, consortium news. The reasons for Netanyahu's panic. So let's talk a little bit about Israel and particularly Benjamin Netanyahu and his recent trip to see Vladimir Putin. He got him out of bed, did he?
Yeah, this is interesting. So Vladimir Putin was on holiday in Sochi, as he does every August, and his vacation was interrupted by an irate Bibi Netanyahu, who stormed in, started waving his hands around, shouting about Iran and how Iran's going to take over Syria, and that if Russia doesn't do anything about it, that Israel will bomb the presidential palace in Damascus. That might sound a bit far-fetched. Did he really say that? That was actually confirmed in the Jerusalem Post via an Israeli official. So you have an absolute mad dog here in Benjamin Netanyahu going around threatening Russia, if they don't help eject Iran from Syria, that they're going to pull the Samson option and start blowing things up around their neighbors. Great behavior there by Israel, great leadership, nice job, Bibi. A real statesman, if there ever was one. So what was Putin's reaction to this? Not much. I think he sent Netanyahu packing back to Tel Aviv, and nothing's going to happen along those lines. And I'll tell you why, Mike. Because Israel's power, and this situation proves it more than anything, Israel's power and leverage in the Middle East politically is all dependent on the U.S. ability to dictate facts on the ground in the Middle East. And because the U.S. does not have that ability anymore, Israel has no more leverage. It's as simple as that. So Israel has found itself on the wrong side of the war on terror. They have been nursing al-Nusra fighters in Israeli hospitals, providing triage for an internationally recognized terrorist group. Israel has, okay? And they're supposedly fighting terrorism. And they're mounting, 100 airstrikes in the last 7 years against Syria, supposedly because of Hezbollah weapons transfers, but that's a complete red herring. What they have been doing is aiding Nusra on the ground strategically all along the way, and ISIS as well, similar to some of the strikes the U.S. has waged, which have hit Syrian army positions and so forth. So what I see here is Israel kicking and screaming, Mike. They lost to Hezbollah in 2006. They were kicked out of South Lebanon. Very embarrassing for the IDF. And here they have backing up proxy forces in Syria, mounting tons of airstrikes against Syria, and the war is lost. So Israel's been part of the coalition, but they've kind of flown under the radar and gotten away with it. Now Netanyahu is furious because he's not the center of attention anymore in the Middle East. And so he's kicking and screaming, demanding something be done about Iran, that Iran's closing the noose on Israel, said Netanyahu. I think Israel is responsible for putting that noose around its own neck because of its policies and its actions and the subjugation of the native Arab population, the Palestinians, is one of Israel's biggest fatal flaws. And until they resolve that problem, Mike, it's just going to get worse diplomatically for Israel, I predict.
Okay, so so far we've been talking about war, conflict, breakup, setting one person off against the other. This seems to be the Western policy, Patrick, Britain and the United States, the transatlantic policy. And yet there is another policy in the world, and I know there's a lot of cynicism amongst people over what's going on with Russia and China and the BRICS. But, you watch what they're doing and you read what they're saying and you listen to what they're saying. And I think there's a lot of positive to be taken out of this. So the BRICS summit is taking place at the moment in China. It's the first time China has hosted the BRICS since Xi Jinping became president. And this year they're describing it as a BRICS Plus format because it's not just the 5 main countries. They've also invited Egypt, Mexico, Thailand, Guinea, and Tajikistan along. They are really pushing the Belt and Road Initiative. They are looking at development and the way that countries are being developed as individual nations, and this is the most important thing, I think. This is here from the BRICS Post is a headline, A Brighter Future for BRICS. This is by Georgy Tolaraya, who is a Russian diplomat. He's now executive director of the Russian National Committee on BRICS Research, and he's just describing how important the BRICS Plus initiative is because they're wanting to spread this out. But of course, many people have suggested in the past that this is some kind of embryonic European Union style or NAFTA style organization. I'm just going to say, when you read what they say about it, this is not how it comes across at all. So they issued their joint declaration. Of course, in the joint declaration that they issued this morning, they were condemning what was going on with North Korea and so on. But just reading the first couple of paragraphs of this, it says, "We, the leaders of the Federative Republic of Brazil, the Russian Federation, the Republic of India, the People's Republic of China, and the Republic of South Africa met on the 4th of September at the 9th BRICS Summit under the theme BRICS Stronger Partnership for a Brighter Future. We endeavour to build on our achievements already made with a shared vision for future development of the BRICS. We reiterate that the overarching objective is and our desire for peace, security and development and cooperation that brought us together 10 years ago. BRICS countries have since traversed a remarkable journey together." And they said, "Upholding development and multilateralism, we're working together for a more just, equitable, fair, democratic and representative international political and economic order." And that, I think, has to be set against the rhetoric of Theresa May with her rules-based international order, and which is a globalist rules-based with one set of rules which apply to everybody. And what seems to be going on here, once again, is this idea of mutual development, multilateralism, nation states, independent, sovereign nation states working together where it's convenient and where it's appropriate. But nobody is trying to sort of take over anybody else or impose a set of outside rules on anybody else. It seems like, to me anyway, Patrick, like a different ideology, a different paradigm that's being presented here.
Well, the problem with the Theresa May's rules-based international order is that it is one set of rules, Mike, and it applies to everybody except the United States and Britain and some of the so-called top-tier countries. Those rules generally don't apply to them, and definitely not to Israel, by the way. But there's a big difference. You can't compare the European Union project to the BRICS project. Look at those core principles, multilateralism, for instance. And also promoting the individual nation states rather than trying to homogenize them and to dampen them down, their identities and so forth. And this is a multi-continental effort, Mike. This isn't, the diversity there is unbelievable. You got Africa, South Africa, Asia, Europe, Eurasia. To compare this to the EU project is completely different. Clearly, this is about cooperation. This is about generating wealth and generating some sort of trade agreements and cooperation between these countries. And especially you have the disadvantaged countries in there that can definitely benefit from partnering up with more powerful, prosperous countries, like I'm talking about South Africa, for instance, can benefit from that. So it's just a different approach, really, to the sort of the neo-colonial approach, which is to rape, pillage, plunder, the globalization approach, which is, offshore everything and import everything and look for as cheap labor as you can find. Every business wants cheap labor, Mike, but there should be some sort of limits and some sort of understanding that this could be like hugely damaging to certain sections of society. So this is something that the Walmarts of the world and some of the big corporations in the West are very slow to want to adopt.
Absolutely. Right. Well, just end on this one, complete change the subject, Patrick, but this from the Evening Standard yesterday. Tech giants must pay to stop extremists using sites, says UK terror watchdog. Now, this is Max Hill QC, who's the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, and he was giving an interview to the Evening Standard. Amber Rudd had suggested, of course, we know over the last couple of months, that tech firms would face massive fines and new legislation if they didn't do more to remove extremist content. Now, of course, you and I know that it's not extremist content that they're removing at the moment because it seems like ISIS and organizations like this have no problem to continue to push out their stuff on Google, on Facebook, on Twitter, and so on. In fact, what they're censoring is the likes of the UK column and 21st Century Wire, Consortium News, and Ron Paul,
Global
and Global Research, these types of organizations. So Max Hill QC said that he didn't want to see these types of what he described as sledgehammer new laws. But what he did do was he said that he had a discussion with some technology companies about whether it would put, so he's talking about encryption mainly here, because of course encryption is the big fear that governments have, that domestic extremists, non-violent extremists are using encryption to get organized and so on. He said that he had a discussion with some of the tech companies, and what he wanted to do was to set up a scenario where encryption would be withheld from the likes of you and I until positive identification of us was made by the tech company. So he said if the technology would permit that sort of perusal, identification and verification prior to posting, that would form a very good solution. So basically what he's saying is everybody would have to, when they hit that post button to send the message encrypted, the check would be done at that point, make sure that you are who you are, and only then would the message be sent encrypted. Otherwise it would be sent perhaps unencrypted. They're still looking at ways to do this. Now this is the Independent Reviewer of Terrorism Legislation website, and what's interesting is they describe themselves, they say the uniqueness of the role lies in its complete independence from government. So here we have a man who, rather than providing oversight to what government is doing, is in fact reinforcing what government is doing by directly contacting the tech companies and suggesting that they take this action. This isn't the activities of an independent reviewer or an oversight committee. This is somebody who is on the same page as government and pushing the same line as government in the direction of the tech companies.
Who's funding the independent reviewer of terror?
Oh, well, that's a very good question.
Because whoever's funding it, it'll be driving the agenda, right?
Government is funding it.
Is funding it. So it's independent from government, but yet it's funded by government. If that's the case, that would be kind of...
So there is Max Hill, and that's what he said. A discussion I've had with some of the tech companies as to whether it's possible to withhold encryption pending positive identification of the internet user. So you've got to be identified. And I just more and more see that we're heading towards a time where any interaction on the internet will require proper identification. And if anybody that was involved in the campaign against ID cards, 10 or 15 years ago, I think we're in a position where we ain't seen nothing yet.
No, and this is exactly, it's very similar to the gun argument, banning guns in America. That anytime there's a gun accident or gun violence, lobby come out sort of calling for gun bans. And the point is, criminals will get their hands on guns or ammo, and terrorists will get their hands on whatever they want to get their hands on. They will communicate whatever they want, whenever they want, either on the dark web or through multiple, sandwiched encryption platforms. You're not going to be able to catch criminals this way. So, but again, this is the state. Its only way to solve these problems seems to be to take more freedoms and privacy and liberty away from everybody. That seems to be the state's only answer, Mike, to all of these so-called crises, is remove your rights, remove your privacy, take away more of your liberty.
Wasn't this issue discussed in 1984 in Brave New World and books like that?
Yeah, that's where we're at. We're here, and I really question some of these so-called advocates, these QCs, these lawyers who are coming out like this. What is their view on personal liberty? And what is the nature of the threat? This is something that we cannot get the government, Mike, to ever come clean on. What is the nature of the terrorist threat? You know, where does the terrorist threat emanate from? What role is the government playing in enabling the terrorist threat? Creating it, facilitating it, the use of informants. Our government's, US, UK, and other NATO state governments' roles in recruiting and dispatching and sending and arming and supporting extremist fighters in Syria and bringing them back to the UK, some of them on benefits, you know, right now, and calling them refugees or asylum seekers or whatever. I mean, is there a level of danger involved in that? Could this create problems in the future? It absolutely has. If you look at the situation with Afghanistan, for instance, and Al-Qaeda in the United States. So as much as there is this kind of homegrown, duplicitous version of domestic terror, there are real terrorists and real extremists running around who have at one point been working with our militaries or the state or intelligence agencies. And how are you going to manage all of these moving parts, Mike? This is a problem. So is maybe the solution not to have gotten involved in that to begin with? Because certainly it was because of some overseas geopolitical agenda. And then it comes home to roost. Look at France. They can't manage everything in France. They're all under surveillance. They're all known wolves. Everybody knows who everybody is, and yet they're still running around doing crime. Big problem. Big problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. We'll leave it at that. Well, more on North Korea tomorrow.
Yeah.
It'll be us in the studio again tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll have some first-hand accounts. Very special guest going to join us tomorrow with some of her images and observations from the DPRK.
Yeah. We will see you then, 1 p.m. as usual. Bye-bye.